Thank you very much there, William. I'm not sure if that's true, but here goes. I feel incredibly honoured to be here talking to you wonderful people and to share the stage with such amazing speakers as we've heard already. It's just a real treat. But I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to jump straight in. I discovered the SDP after I became confused at what I thought was Rod's dedication to Scottish nationalism. True story. But when I realised the N was actually a D and looked you guys up, the website hooked me in pretty quickly. When I read through the new declaration, no doubt like many of you, I found myself nodding away to political views that strongly resonated with me. But amongst all the good stuff, there was one claim that really jumped out. And that was the declaration's acknowledgement that what we need is a values and virtue-led cultural renewal. In my opinion, this is the root problem we face as a society, and many of the other issues that we talk about are downstream from our cultural erosion. But have you any idea how difficult it would be to see this kind of cultural shift? Do we even know what kind of culture that we want to renew or build? And do we know what it would take? Well, I don't have all the answers, but I think I have some insight, as it's something I've been thinking about for a while. So here goes. In the Republic, Plato talks about what an ideal state would be like. It would involve a strict separation of the population into 3 tiers. There would be the farmers and the craftsmen, then there would be a military class, and then there'd be a class of rulers. The details of his state aren't what's important. What's important is what comes next. Plato realized that even if his state were hugely successful and provided for the population's needs, it would be unstable unless it were thought to be more than just a useful way to live. He knew that his society would only remain if it were understood to be a reflection of the way things are. In other words, it had to be a natural way to organize a society that was rooted in a theory about the nature of the world. Plato's solution was to propagate a mythology that claimed a person's social tier was determined by the kind of metal the gods implanted in them at birth. Gold for the rulers, silver for the military, and brass or iron for the rest. He called his mythology a noble lie, a lie that, when believed, would provide the narrative and metaphysical basis of his ideal state, and so ensure that the state continued to function as it should. Now, whatever his motivations, Plato was onto something here. I'm not going to argue with David Hume over whether values logically follow from facts. But what I think is incontrovertible is the human tendency to read our values from the way in which we see the world, and conversely to inscribe our values into our beliefs about the way the world is. The relationship here is not in one direction only. There are times in history when new theories about the world have led to new values. And there are times when a commitment to certain values have led to a revised understanding of history and the nature of reality. So, the relationship between our metaphysics, which is our view of the world, on the one hand, and our values on the other, is symbiotic. Each influence and provides support for the other. In our past cultural context, that symbiotic relationship held between a Christian theology with its attendant historical narrative and the values and virtues that that view of the world underpinned. Since the Christian worldview gave fundamental status to an unseen realm, the highest values were not those that could be materially justified and measured. And since it held as paragon a man who suffered in life and was vindicated only after death, righteous suffering was infused with a redemptive quality, and it was primarily in the hereafter where justice was expected. So according to a Christian metaphysics, it is the world beyond that provides the basis for our cultural values and gives meaning to our lives beyond our material circumstances. But what now? Our culture is post-Christian, and we have been steeped in scientific materialism. And whatever optimistic Star Trek-like fantasies we may have entertained about where science could take us, that's all gone now too. So then, what is our hope? Where is the meaning in life? What can it be based on? If you are young and idealistic, if you want to make a difference in the world, where do you turn? What do you do? I'm sure there are many reasons for the seemingly unstoppable march of extreme progressivism in our culture. But this is the one that I see. It provides people, especially the young, with meaning. As a Gates Scholar at Cambridge, I have had conversations with bright and highly motivated young people that would lay down their life if it meant the statue of Cecil Rhodes would be removed from Oriel College in Oxford. I wish that were a joke. These people have found a narrative and a metaphysics that clearly lays out coordinates around which they can live a purposeful life. Their progressivism tells a story about the past. It explains how we got here. It tells them where the roots of evil lie, and it points towards a material utopia in which group equity has finally put an end to rape, racism, and war. It doesn't matter that their metaphysics are inconsistent or that their narrative is contrary to fact, because that's not where its power lies. If you are left scratching your head at every pound of cultural muscle that progressivism puts on, despite its ludicrous claims, then you are just like the remainers of the Brexit wars that didn't understand why their economic models and projections regarding car manufacturing were impotent in the face of take back control. Wokery is going nowhere, and believing is seeing. And I know that may be a difference of opinion between me and some others, but that's what I see at Cambridge. So what can be done? Spoiler alert, liberalism is not the answer. In my opinion, it's too easy and too lazy to label wokery a secular religion, with the implication that what we had in our liberal order before, at the end of history, was somehow a golden, religion-free and scientific age of reason. If liberalism didn't proselytize, then what were the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya? Once domestic emancipation had been broadly achieved, we, the liberal faithful, took our gospel overseas. And there is nothing religiously neutral about a value system that elevates the individual as supreme and calculates political decisions with a consequentialist scorecard. And, to reinforce my central thesis, it is no coincidence that a scientific metaphysics of atoms colliding in the void accompanied the rise of individualism and consequentialist ethics in the first place. Liberalism, too, has its metaphysics. The problem for liberals, though, is that they completely lack a meaningful narrative to combat what I, and I believe our dear leader, take to be a natural religion of liberalism, and that's the hyper-progressivism we see today. Freedom is a vital and necessary means to an ethical life, but it cannot constitute an end in itself. You are free. Okay, now what? Perhaps the call is to free others, but we discovered at the start of this century that not everybody wants to be free. So what then? Pursue happiness? Well, if happiness is a feeling, and if one person's freedom makes someone else unhappy, then since freedom is the means to pleasant feelings, it's liberties that must be curtailed in the name of their supposed ends. In short, if the culture war is a fight to the death between liberalism and progressivism, I can only see one eventual winner. But all hope is not lost. Back to the SDP. The new declaration is correct to point the finger of blame not at recent progressivism, but at free market economic policy, laissez-faire libertarianism, and rampant individualism. Hyper-progressivism is the symptom and not the cause. Like everybody else, I am not fundamentally an individual. You cannot disentangle me from my family, my community, my faith, my nation, my culture, or my generation. And until we recognize our fundamental interconnectedness, the fact that our relational state is woven into the fabric of our human experience, and that this, rather than the posits of physicists' theories, comprises the deep nature of things, then we cannot cognize the metaphysical basis upon which social policy and the ethical life must be grounded. We are individuals only within the concentric layers of our various communities, beginning with our family and moving outwards. And I am not free except when I am enabled and encouraged to recognize and adhere to the duties of my adopted stations with a husband, father, employee, citizen, or saint. Similarly, a vocation is not merely a taxable paycheck. A city is not a collection of buildings, and a nation is not an aggregate of people within a particular geolocation. These things have a life of their own and a character that goes beyond their component parts, and they ought to be considered, nurtured, and protected by any responsible government. Instead of this, we have an atomized and hyper-quantized mode of thinking that dominates every facet of life and dictates to us every decision. It breaks everything down into its smallest measurable parts before stuffing them back into models and formulae in an effort to churn out bottom-line maximizing results. If it isn't measurable, it isn't real. This way of thinking is not only false, it is the ruin of beauty, social harmony, and ultimately our humanity, and it must be reined in. I joined the SDP because I believe it's a vital instrument in the push against the cultural tide. But if we are to make headway, I believe we need more than a political party with good sense policies. We need to present a new narrative, a new metaphysics, perhaps even a new gospel. We need a message that captures the next generation of meaning seekers, but one that also connects with the truths that lie forgotten in the bones of the disenchanted and the weary. We need, in short, a new way of thinking and speaking about the values and virtues that our culture desperately needs. One that is based in a concrete and supportive worldview, drawn from lost elements of Western thought, dusted off, revived, and renewed for a 21st century purpose. If I had 50 minutes to speak rather than 15, I might sketch out some of what I believe must be its pertinent features and describe the places where I think we should look further. But as it is, I shall end with this incentive. This conference is entitled, "It Cannot Go On Like This." But of course, unless something changes, it will, and God help our children. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. But there is also a palpable desperation in the air, a nationwide longing for something of substance to save us from ourselves and bring about our salvation. We just need to harness it. With the right narrative and the right metaphysics, we can express a powerful and inspiring message that says, this is how we got here, and this is how things are. Therefore, these are our values, and this is what needs to be done, and therefore you should vote SDP. It might just work. Thank you.